Screening approval. The movie is Sylvester Stallone's Rambo. A strong, good man, Rambo, who, like his country, has been through the war in Vietnam and carries a chip on his shoulder. Is it okay, Rambo asked, when offered the chance to go back to Nam and find out what happened to the missing in action? Is it okay to win this time? The answer is no. Bureaucrats in high places are still following a no-win policy. But Rambo wins despite them. He kills so many Russian officers you'll lose count. He kills them in more ways than you can imagine. He brings the boys with him, boys held nearly 20 years, wasted, tortured, but home. In the person of Rambo, America goes back to Vietnam, and this time America wins. Why is Rambo a record breaker? And what does it tell us? Does it tell us that we are back and standing tall, or does it tell us that we are a little sick, hungover still from Vietnam? Bob Dornan.
Well, here is a true role model, Richard Cohen. Johnny Rambo. He's courageous, he's fearless, he's physical, he's athletic, he's soft-spoken, he is intelligent, he's resourceful. Is this not a role model rather than Prince, Boy George, or Michael Jackson? Why did you write that ultra-whimpering column of yours?
Well, I never wrote a column about Boy George or Michael Jackson. I wrote a column about Rambo. Among the things he is deceived and dumb. And I think the picture ought to be rated D. I mean, it has a strange kind of history that it tells us. It tells us that we lost the Vietnam War because we were stabbed in the back at home, because the soldiers were handcuffed. They weren't able to do their job.
They were handcuffed.
No. What I think handcuffed us in Vietnam was the situation that we're in a war in the wrong place in the wrong time. We shouldn't have fought it in the
But
first
they were
place.
handcuffed for 10 years. They couldn't even blow up the MiG bases. They couldn't even hit them when they took off. They had to wait till they flew in the sun and shot your wingman off your wing. My friends died that way. The rules of engagement have just been released by Goldwater. They were a disgrace. It was a liberal-run, bureaucratic war.
Well, for what piece of garbage? For what purpose?
For what purpose? To keep South Vietnam free? To stop the genocide?
No.
To stop Soviet
For what purpose did liberals handcuff you?
Because they basically don't know how to follow through. They're uncomfortable with anything that involves
Why didn't
action.
you do what Rambo did?
What's that?
Well, why didn't you fight it?
No, there are people who tried to fight that war, and they were handcuffed.
And you allowed them to handcuff you. You, member of Congress, big hero?
I didn't. I grabbed that. I was on the air during most of the war, went over there 9 times. Bitch like hell, but there was no turning around. The indecision.
I wanted to, Dornan wanted to
Fight it through the glorious victory in
That's Johnny Rambo.
Let me ask our guest in Los Angeles, Mr. Stein. You're a critic and a film writer. I want to know whether you're also an historian. Well, I'm sorry. This movie, Rambo, suggests that the whole problem with Vietnam is that we were stabbed in the back. It sounds a little bit as though as the Germans did after World War I.
Well, I think that the message of the movie is many different things, but I think the message of the response to the movie is the really interesting thing. You can go to any theater in Southern California, and I've been to many, and audiences are shrieking about this movie. They love this movie. Now, why do they love it so much? They love it because they say, here is an American guy, Sylvester Stallone. He was Rocky. He's Mr. American. And he is not going to allow himself to be hamstrung by the editorial writers and reporters at the Washington Post anymore. He's going to go through and kick the commies and take down names. Now, you may think that that is a bad message or a simple-minded message, but that is the message that Americans clearly want to hear in large numbers.
I just asked you, what I meant to ask you was not whether it was good or bad, but whether it was accurate. I mean,
I think it would take a person who knows more about it than any of us on this show, with all due respect, to say whether it's accurate. I want to talk about the tape. You know, there's a saying on Wall Street, don't argue with the tape. What the tape is saying is that Americans are furious that some layer of bureaucracy or media aristocracy kept us from winning that war. Maybe there was some other reason. The American people obviously don't think so. They really do seem to think, at least the ones who are seeing this movie, that we were stabbed in the back. I point out that this is a very important public
Mr. Stein, that is
perception.
Mr. Stein, surely as a common ordinary reader, you went through this, whether you were in Vietnam or not, I don't know. But surely,
Thank God, no.
you must realize that that's just an absolute piece of baloney.
Well, I don't know it's an absolute piece of baloney. In fact, I don't believe it.
Editors of the Washington
How is it
Post
conceivable that the United States could not have beaten Vietnam, a country about 1/10 our size, if we had really wanted to?
We never lost
Obviously,
the battle.
something stopped us.
Yeah, but the question is, then why did we lose it? I mean, why
We lost it because of people who are interfering with the conduct of the war.
Well, let me correct your history. Let me just correct your history. In the first place, the Washington Post editorially supported the Vietnam War until 1968.
until we won the Tet Offensive.
Yes, and then we saw you were winning.
Well, wait a minute, Mr. Stein. Wait a minute, Mr. Stein. Let me. You finish your comment. I want to hear what you say.
Well, I'm saying that, and I just wanted to point out that he's wrong on his history about the Washington Post. And secondly, most newspapers and most television, most people supported this war for a very long time. The reason that the war lost support is because it wasn't getting anywhere, because we were fighting the wrong war. We went into that war. If Rambo doesn't know it, I would like to remind him of it. We went into that war because people like John Foster Dulles and Dean Russ told us that if Vietnam went, China was behind it, and Russia was behind that, and the dominoes would fall. Wait just a second.
Well,
now
much closer now than they were.
Vietnam is virtually at war with China. The dominoes did not fall. The Philippines stand, Thailand stands, and the last I looked, so did San Francisco.
The Russians
they're not in San Francisco, but they're a lot closer
The
to San
Russians
Francisco.
are in Vietnam, but do you feel more threatened because you lost Vietnam? Do you really sleep worse at night because Vietnam is gone?
One of the best scenes in the film, Ben, I'm sure you appreciated this scene, was when Rambo blows up a flying tank, the big dreaded Soviet Hind helicopter.
The
their
audiences
version of
were
Air War.
shrieking. The audiences were shrieking.
And you know why? Because the audiences know there are 12 of those now stationed in North America and Nicaragua, and that helicopter is genociding the Mujahideen.
All right, well, we're going to show that helicopter scene a little later, but let me get back to Mr. Stein. Mr. Stein, you've been saying some things, and we've been talking over you, so go ahead and say now.
Well, I think the key question is not, were we right in being in Vietnam, were we wrong in being in Vietnam? The question that is being answered by this movie is, how do the American people feel about Vietnam? And at least an awful lot of them feel as if, yes, we were stabbed in the back. They are sick and tired of the U.S. tiptoeing around people while they are killing our soldiers in East Germany, while they are running wild in Central America. The response I get from seeing this movie is that the American people would like a much more forthright foreign policy. It seems to me that's the only real question we're asking.
All right, well, let me ask you about that forthright foreign policy, Mr. Stein. Now, one of the messages of this movie is that the soldiers who were missing in action in Vietnam, many of them at least, are in fact in prison camps, being subjected to various forms of terrible Oriental torture. Now, do you think that is a good message to give the American people?
I think the interesting message is you're mocking and making fun of the idea that these prisoners are being kept and tortured. That, to me, is what the American people are reacting against, is people like you making fun.
I'm not making fun of it. I'm asking you. I think that...
What does it mean to say being subjected to all kinds of forms of Oriental torture?
Well,
you are mocking the people who are seriously
I'm not mocking anything. If there are any Americans being held in prison in Vietnam, then we ought to do something about it. But all I'm saying is, the message of this movie tells the American people that they're missing in action, and there must be thousands of anguished Americans who wish that those people could turn up. It tells them that they are alive and being held and tortured in prison camps, and that seems to me a statement stated as a fact that is very dangerous.
And with all due respect, that is not the message of the movie. With all due respect, the message of the movie is not whether there are POWs or MIAs still being held. The message is, shall we allow Joe American, Joe every fighting GI, to go in and fight? Shall we, the American people, be betrayed by our leaders and our ruling class again and again and again, or are we ever going to get a chance to be free?
Shall we allow them to fight forever and ever for no good reason? Shall we allow them to fight in Vietnam not for 10 years, not for 12 years, but maybe for 20 years?
Well, that was the
message.
message.
The war would be over now unless we pulled out?
That was the message. The message that you're expressing. The message that you're expressing is the message that was popular on college campuses 15 or 20 years ago. And I agree with you, that was a popular message. America doesn't want to hear that message anymore. I'm not going to argue with you about the history of what caused the Vietnam War to be lost. What I'm saying is that the American people are furious at losing. They're sick of losing. They're sick of being kicked all around the world.
I think they're also furious. I think they're also furious that their fine young men who go to West Point, Annapolis Air Force Academy, who served in Vietnam, the outstanding enlisted men who never lost a battle, had total air and naval supremacy, barely even lost a hill. A small unit engagement, never were defeated in Vietnam, and they're tired of seeing them portrayed by Jane Fonda as psychopathic killers, drug users, dope fiends, and they see a real hero here. I know that most of our men say.
They're very happy at long last to see a movie in which the American fighting man is an unequivocal hero. You notice that all the men in uniforms are heroes, all the Americans in uniforms are heroes, and all the Americans wearing white shirts and ties are villains.
All right.
It's a great anger at the ruling class.
We're gonna, when we get back, Mr. Stein, I'd like to hear your views on whether or not this movie glorifies war, holds it up to American youth, who are the principal audiences that are seeing it, as something that you can win hand to hand. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking about the astonishing, even historic popularity of Sylvester Stallone's movie called Rambo, in which America goes back to Vietnam, and this time it wins. Our guest here in the studio is Richard Cohen of the Washington Post, and out in Los Angeles, Benjamin Stein, a film writer and critic, in that far-off part of the country. Now, let's look for just a moment at what Mr. Stein mentioned and what Mr. Dornan mentioned, which was a scene in the movie where Sylvester Stallone, in the person of Rambo, takes out one of those giant Soviet helicopters. Well, there come the Russians after him with machine gun fire. Can any American survive? Rambo wins again.
Tom, we misled them just a bit. That was a captured American Huey that we left behind in Saigon. The big Soviet Hind helicopters enters the scene a few minutes.
But it loses too.
Oh yes, he blows it right out of the air. Everything loses to Rambo. That's the way Americans would like to see us supply surface-to-air missiles to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and see them blow the genociding helicopters out of the air.
Stallone and end it all.
Well, see, you are making fun of everything that the American public is appreciating and screaming with appreciation and happiness about. Your behavior about this movie, behind this whole subject, is really a shocking illustration of how out of touch you are with the mood of this country. You make fun of Sylvester Stallone. The people who are watching this movie are worshiping Sylvester.
Okay, Mr. Stein. Mr. Stein, I'll grant that. We are making fun of it. I think it's as thin as Jack Armstrong and Wheaties. But let me ask you this. The people who are watching this movie are jumping up and down from their seats and screaming, "Kill, kill, kill." Does that reflect what your idea is of the mood of this country?
It reflects the fact that Americans believe that it is good and noble to sacrifice for their country and for their friends, and they do not mock that, Mr. Braden. They think that is a good thing in a human being. And the fact that you mock it shows, I think, a certain gap in your moral education and not in the moral education.
Well, let me ask you about your education. Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Stein. Let me ask you about your education. I've been through a war. I think Bob has been through a war. You say you didn't go to Vietnam. Do you think this movie is an accurate reflection of what war is? It seems to me.
Absolutely not. And that's not the point. It's not a newsreel. The movie is really, to my mind, with respect, a plebiscite on how do people feel, at least some people feel, about the United States fighting man and about United States commitment to ideals, to friendship, to comrades, to allies. It's getting a resounding affirmative vote. That is what it is. It's not supposed to be a piece of history. It's not supposed to be a newsreel.
Ben, let me comment on something. It is not as accurate or authentic as Paths of Glory was on Kubrick's film on World War I, or All Quiet on the Western Front, or even Bill Wellman's Walk in the Warm Italian Sun. The one about Italy, our American guys fighting. It's hyperbole, it's exaggeration, It's fun, it's wild, it's sort of like Firefox or Red Dawn or Uncommon Valor or the Chuck Norris film. His brother died in Vietnam, so he makes Missing in Action, showing the American fighting man with pride and courage. It's kind of the flip side of the kind of film that Richard loves, that we had to sit through the day after, the baloney of Missing, the scum of Jane Fonda's Coming Home, which showed all the American vets to be psychopaths. It's finally the other side of the coin, and I kind of think it's healthy for once to have people, instead of slumping in their seat, feeling like they've been flagellated over how ugly America is, always wrong.
No, come on, Bob, it's not that. We're talking about war, and if we're talking about war, war is ugly. And war is not fun, and war is not heroic hand-to-hand combat.
And there's no question, nobody on the show disagrees about that. No one thinks war is wonderful. No one thinks war is good. There's nobody on the show who thinks it's good to kill or to be killed. The question is, what is this movie saying to America? It's saying, do you think we should be tough? Do you think we should be strong, forthright, loyal? Do you think we should be more brave and daring? Or do you think we should constantly be hitting ourselves on the heads and saying we're the bullies and fascists of the world? The American people are saying, Rambo, you're our guy, you're our proxy. Go in and kick those people back who've been kicking us since
and
World
bring
War
out
II.
6 Missing in Action
But
POWs.
gung-ho on the chief there, and no one gets hurt, no one gets killed. Rambo gets away with murder. I mean,
Well, he was all alone.
But
The audience loves it.
none of the Americans get hurt either. I mean, when Rambo was tortured, he seems to be having a wonderful time. When they put the knife
Well,
to his
that's
face,
just
it makes him
nonsense.
seething. Of
That's
course
just
it's
nonsense.
Of course
I mean,
it's not.
he obviously is not having a wonderful time while he's being tortured. That's, again, your mockery of him. It is amazing to me that you cannot see that this is a person whom America is tightened
I will bet you, Ben, that Richard Cohen does not know Cubans ran the torture program of our men in Vietnam. Cubans! 3 of them sent over by Fidel, and they tortured some of our guys like Major Earl Cobile to death. They beat him to death, his head against the floor in front of other men. They beat one man so bad that there was no skin left on the back of his body from his heels to his hair. People know that out there. They know it intuitively if they've never read it.
And they're saying, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the people who are beating up our boys? Are you going to North Vietnam with Harrison Salisbury and Jane Fonda and being on their side? Or are you on the side of the people who enter USA? And where do we know which side they're on?
How about being on the side of the people who say, don't send them there to get beat up. Don't send them there so they get beat up by Cubans or anyone else. Don't send them there to be shot and die for a silly cause.
That's not a question
Don't
that's being
liberate
asked in the movie. The movie
It's
says,
not about the
given the fact
liberation
that
of
they're
France.
there,
Why? They
the
couldn't
movie
live
says,
in
given the
Vietnam.
fact that they're there, what should we do about it?
Well, what about the
Cambodia? We ran out on Cambodia and 2 million people died. Look, and this movie gets even for that.
You simply
This
cannot...
movie gets even for the Japanese.
Allegorically, yes.
Oh,
In a mythical sort of a way. It says the American people, there are Americans there alive, and maybe if we had the
You
guts,
don't
we
know
could
that there
go
are
get 'em.
any Americans there
I do.
alive.
I believe there are. I believe
But it
there are.
doesn't matter. The movie says much more than that. The movie isn't just talking about MIS. The movie is saying, America, aren't you sick of being kicked around in Nicaragua?
Exactly.
Aren't you being sick of kicked around in Russia? Aren't you being sick of being kicked around everywhere?
Mr. Stein, I don't
And that's
get you, but I
exactly
have
why
to say goodbye to you. I have to say goodbye to you, and I want to thank you for being our guest on Crossfire. And Richard Cohen of the Washington Post, thank you for being our guest on Crossfire. Bob, Mr. Stein says, and I quote, "The American soldier in Vietnam was betrayed by the pansies," unquote. Now, if the country believes that, and maybe this popularity of this movie proves it, we're back to pre-Nazi Germany.
No, I think, Tom, what the American movie audiences want are to see Americans as the good guys. I attended the Academy Awards in 1979 when John Wayne announced that Deer Hunter had won. Behind me, 2 rows were Hayden and Fonda. Tom Hayden screamed out that Deer Hunter wasn't true. It was. Our guys were tortured to death. They were evil. And they committed a genocide. They got 14 concentration camps, and there's Soviet bombers flying out of Cam Bay.
Okay, from the left, I'm Tom Braden.
And from the Rambo right, I'm Bob Dornan. Join us again for another edition of Crossfire.